In 1663, scientists pulled a jumble of prehistoric bones from a German cave and convinced Europe they had found proof of unicorns. The Magdeburg Unicorn wasn't just a mistake, it was science getting spectacularly wrong on a legendary scale. Their error rewrote paleontology, but it all started with a single broken horn and an expert the world trusted. How did brilliance become a breathtaking blunder? And what really happened inside that chaotic cave? Seweckenberge, 1663. The dig began not with ceremony, but with the sound of picks biting into limestone and the shouts of laborers scrambling over broken ground. Bones surfaced in fragments, splintered, caked with centuries of cave dust, sometimes wedged so tightly in rock that extraction meant further destruction. There were no field notebooks, no careful grid mapping, just a scramble to pull out anything that looked promising. Every shovel strike risked shattering something irreplaceable. Among the chaos stood Johannes Meyer, an astronomer and treasurer, clutching his own notes. He watched as bone after bone was pried loose with little regard for order or context. The workers, miners by trade and not scientists, tossed aside smaller pieces in favor of the largest finds. Meyer's account, now lost to history, was the sole attempt to record what was happening. One man scribbling observations, while the rest focused on speed and spectacle. The bones themselves told a story of violence and time. Some were snapped clean through, others worn smooth from centuries of water trickling through the limestone. A massive skull fragment, jagged at the edges, hinted at something enormous, though what, no one could say. Then came the find that changed everything. A single curved object, heavy and stained, unmistakable in its resemblance to the legendary unicorn's horn. It was the kind of discovery that stopped conversation and drew everyone closer. The diggers presented it to Meyer and the abbess, certain they had uncovered something singular. The cave floor was a puzzle of ribs, vertebrae, and limb bones, all jumbled together in no apparent order. No one paused to document their original positions. Bones from different layers, different corners, were piled together in baskets. The notion of a systematic excavation, of recording depth, orientation, or association simply didn't exist. What mattered was the spectacle, and the hope that these fragments might add up to something extraordinary. By the time the bones reached the surface, any hope of reconstructing their original arrangement was lost. The evidence had been scrambled, context dissolved. Meyer's field note, now vanished, would become the only trace of what had truly happened in that cave. What remained was a collection of broken, mismatched pieces, raw material for the experts who would soon take over, and for the legend that was about to take shape. Otto von Guericke's reputation was already secure by the time the bones reached his hands. He was the mayor of Magdeburg, a celebrated inventor, and the man who had famously demonstrated the power of atmospheric pressure with his vacuum pump and the Magdeburg hemispheres. His name alone carried weight in the world of natural philosophy. When he examined the jumble of bones from Seweckenberge, local leaders and scholars listened. The prospect of a unicorn skeleton was more than a curiosity. It was a potential scientific triumph, a relic to rival the wonders of ancient Rome or Egypt. In 17th century Europe, unicorns were not simply the stuff of fairy tales. They were woven into the fabric of religion, medicine, and royal power. Bibles of the era, translated from Hebrew with a generous hand, describe unicorns as real animals. Apothecaries sold unicorn horn powder as a universal antidote, and physicians prescribed it for everything from poison to epilepsy. The horn trade was lucrative. Narwhal tusks, passed off as unicorn horns, fetched prices 10 times their weight in gold. Kings and princes displayed these treasures in their cabinets of curiosities, proof of their wealth and their connection to the miraculous. In this climate, a fossil unicorn would be worth more than gold, scientifically, economically, and politically. Guericke's involvement gave the bones an aura of credibility. He was a man who understood air and vacuum, who had built machines that astounded Europe. If he said these bones belonged to a unicorn, who would dare contradict him? His reconstruction was published in the Medical Physical Miscellany, Miscellanea Curiosa Medico-Physica, with engravings that captured the imagination of scholars and collectors alike. The skeleton, with its towering single horn, became an object of fascination. The story did not end there. The philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, one of the most respected minds of the Enlightenment, took up the unicorn's cause. He received drawings and reports, and with the help of his engraver, Nicholas Seelander, produced a new illustration for his 1749 book, Protogaea. Leibniz did not visit the bones in person. He worked from descriptions, sketches, and, crucially, his own idea of what a unicorn should look like. He and Seelander corrected and completed the figure, ensuring it matched the silhouette of the legendary beast found in tapestries and royal emblems. With Leibniz's endorsement, the unicorn was no longer just a local curiosity. It was a specimen with the stamp of Europe's intellectual elite. The public, and even many scientists, accepted the Magdeburg Unicorn as genuine. The combination of Guericke's mechanical genius and Leibniz's philosophical authority locked the error into place. The chimera was displayed, discussed, and copied in natural history texts. The fact that the bones had been assembled without any reference to living anatomy went unchallenged. The cultural appetite for unicorns, the economic lure of the horn trade, and the weight of scholarly endorsement all worked together to transform a pile of Ice Age remains into a fossil legend. For decades, the Magdeburg Unicorn stood as proof that myth could become science, if the right people believed in it. The unicorn's face was the showstopper. Leibniz's engraving presents a skull that stretches forward like a horse's, crowned with a single, towering spiral horn. It looks plausible, if you ignore every rule of mammalian anatomy. The real bone at the heart of this spectacle was a battered fragment of woolly mammoth cranium, broad and domed, nothing at all like the narrow, elongated skulls of horses or antelopes. Mammoth skulls are built for strength, with thick bone and wide, rounded vaults to anchor massive tusks. But that didn't fit the unicorn myth, so the skull was trimmed down in the drawing, reshaped until it resembled the animal everyone wanted to see. Then there's the horn. In the Magdeburg Unicorn, it rises straight from the forehead, as if nature itself had designed an animal to match the tapestries of medieval Europe. In reality, the so-called horn is a mammoth tusk, heavy, curved, and designed to arc outward and downward from the side of the skull. Mammoth tusks never grow vertically. Their natural curvature is unmistakable, a sweeping crescent meant for foraging through snow and ice. Yet here, the tusk was jammed upright, defying both physics and biology, simply because a unicorn demands a single vertical horn. The result is a silhouette that's instantly recognizable and completely impossible. No one in 1663 had a reference collection of mammoth skulls or tusks. Comparative anatomy was a foreign language. Instead, the reconstruction followed the logic of art, not evidence. The engraver smoothed away broken edges, ignored the wide nasal opening, and placed the tusk where a unicorn's horn ought to be, centered, vertical, and proud. The effect is striking, but it's pure invention. The real animal would have looked nothing like this. The forehead is too narrow, the horn's base is set at the wrong angle, and the proportions are all wrong. It's a fantasy made from Ice Age leftovers. This was not a matter of carelessness. It was a deliberate choice, aesthetic bias disguised as anatomical reasoning. The team wanted a unicorn, so every bone was forced into the role. The vertical tusk wasn't an accident, it was a requirement. The skull's shape wasn't questioned, it was adapted. Without the framework of comparative anatomy, there was no way to check these choices against nature. The bones were puzzle pieces, and the solution was whatever fit the legend best. Modern forensic paleontology would spot the errors in seconds. A mammoth tusk's curvature and orientation are diagnostic. The cranial vault, the placement of the nasal opening, the thickness of the bone, all point to a mammoth, not a unicorn or a horse. But in the 17th century, the only guide was imagination and the weight of cultural expectation. The Magdeburg Unicorn's head stands as a monument to what happens when myth trumps evidence. And as the rest of the skeleton would soon reveal, this was just the beginning. The real spectacle begins below the unicorn's head. The so-called spine is a parade of mismatched vertebrae, cobbled together from at least 2 Ice Age giants. Some of the bones belong to the woolly mammoth, thick, blocky, built to support 6 tons of muscle and fur. Others are from the woolly rhinoceros, smaller but still massive, with a different shape and articulation. In the Magdeburg Mount, these vertebrae are forced into a single, continuous column, as if nature had never heard of species boundaries. Each joint is a gamble. Mammoth vertebra meets rhino vertebra at angles that would snap the spinal cord of any living animal. The result is a backbone that looks plausible from a distance, but on closer inspection defies every rule of mammalian anatomy. Moving down, the ribs are an even stranger collage. Some are thick and gently curved, straight from a mammoth's chest. Others are slender and sharply bent, unmistakably cave bear. There's no attempt at matching size or curvature, just a hope that enough ribs will suggest a rib cage. In places, the ribs splay out like the spokes of a broken wheel, some attached too high, others too low, none of them lining up with the vertebrae they're supposed to protect. The chest cavity this creates couldn't contain lungs, let alone a beating heart. The limbs are where the illusion fully unravels. Woolly rhinoceros femurs and tibias are jammed together at impossible angles, with knee joints twisted sideways and ankles that point in 2 directions at once. On one side, a femur from a mammoth meets a tibia from a rhino, their joint surfaces hopelessly misaligned. The scale is all wrong. Bones from animals weighing 2 tons are mixed with those from animals 3 times as heavy, producing legs that would buckle under their own weight. If this creature tried to walk, it would collapse before taking a single step. But the masterpiece of anatomical confusion is the pelvis. Instead of anchoring the limbs and supporting the animal's core, the Magdeburg pelvis is mounted upside down. The sockets that should cradle the femurs now point skyward, while the broad, flat surfaces designed to bear weight are left dangling. This is not a subtle error. The orientation makes it physically impossible for the legs to attach in any way that would allow movement, or even standing. Yes, they really thought an animal evolved to have its pelvis upside down. Modern forensic paleontology starts with articulation. Do the bones fit together as they would in life? Here, every connection fails the test. The vertebrae don't align, the ribs don't match, the limbs can't move, and the pelvis is a structural dead end. There's no way to mistake this for a single animal if you check the joints and proportions. But in 1663, there was no articulation analysis, no comparative collections, no understanding of biomechanics. Bones were chosen for their size and dramatic effect, not for anatomical accuracy. The Magdeburg Unicorn is less a skeleton than a visual argument, a case built on spectacle, not evidence. Each mismatched piece exposes the absence of method and the power of expectation to override the obvious. The errors aren't random, they're systematic, repeated at every level of assembly. What was meant to be a triumph of science is, bone by bone, a masterclass in how not to reconstruct the past. Modern forensic paleontology brings a different toolkit to the Magdeburg Unicorn's so-called remains. Start with the skull fragment, broad, domed, and unmistakably mammoth. The cranial vault, the thick bone, the wide nasal opening. Every feature matches Mammothus primigenius, the woolly mammoth that roamed the Eurasian steppe from 40,000 to 10,000 years ago. The so-called horn? Not a horn at all, but a mammoth tusk, its natural curve meant for sweeping snow, never for pointing skyward from a forehead. Even the tusk's growth rings, visible under magnification, confirm its identity. Move to the vertebrae. Some are massive, blocky, built for bearing the weight of a 6-ton grazer. Others are shorter, more compact, with a different articulation. These belong to the woolly rhinoceros, Coelodonta antiquitatis, another Ice Age giant. The mismatch is obvious. Mammoth vertebrae don't fit with rhino vertebrae, no matter how you rotate them. Comparative anatomy reveals the diagnostic ridges, the neural spine orientation, the size differences that make each species distinct. Rib fragments add a third animal to the mix. Some curve gently, broad and thick, mammoth. Others are slender, sharply bent, matching the cave bear, Ursus spelaeus, known for hibernating and dying in these same limestone caves. Limb bones, mostly femurs and tibias, are classic woolly rhino, robust, but scaled for a 2-ton animal, not the mammoth's bulk. The pelvis, once flipped upside down for drama, reveals its true orientation under 3D scanning, the hip sockets finally facing the right direction. Radiocarbon dating confirms all these bones are Pleistocene, but not necessarily from the same year or even the same millennium. This is the forensic reality, a natural cave death assemblage, a jumble of bones from mammoth, rhino, and bear, all mixed by centuries of animal traffic, water flow, and collapse. Modern analysis sorts each bone to its rightful owner. The unicorn vanishes. In its place, the real Ice Age giants of Germany step forward, their identities confirmed by the cold logic of comparative anatomy and digital reconstruction. The Magdeburg Unicorn is hardly alone in the fossil hall of shame. History is littered with spectacular misfires that, in hindsight, seem almost as improbable as a unicorn with an upside-down pelvis. Take the Crystal Palace iguanodon of 1854. Victorian sculptors, working with little more than a handful of bones, decided the dinosaur's thumb spike belonged on its nose. For generations, visitors wandered beneath a life-sized model with a horned snout, a mistake that only faded when more complete skeletons proved the spike was meant for the hand. Then there's Albert Koch's Hydrarchos from 1845. Koch chained together whale vertebrae, stretched them out, and declared the result a sea serpent. Museums paid good money to display this stitched-together monster, only to discover they'd bought a ticket to a traveling fraud show. Even the mighty Tyrannosaurus Rex spent most of the 20th century in the wrong pose. Museum mounts showed it standing upright, tail dragging, like a prehistoric kangaroo. Not until the 1990s did scientists, armed with better fossils and biomechanics, realize T-Rex ran with its body nearly horizontal. And for nearly a century, the so-called Brontosaurus wore the wrong skull, a Camarasaurus head bolted to a mismatched neck because the right one hadn't yet been found. Every one of these blunders forced paleontologists to sharpen their methods. Mistakes, not triumphs, are the real engine of progress. Which brings us to a question. What other fossil fiascos deserve a forensic re-examination? Suggest your favorite scientific mix-up in the comments. Science advances by correcting itself, one glorious error at a time. In 1663, Otto von Guericke published the Magdeburg Unicorn, assembling mammoth, woolly rhinoceros, and cave bear bones into a mythical beast, and the error was endorsed by major figures like Leibniz. This case revealed how, without comparative anatomy or biomechanical checks, even respected scientists could turn Ice Age remains into legend. The original illustration, reprinted in Miscellanea Curiosa Medico-Physica, stands as evidence of the pitfalls of assembling fossils without a scientific framework. Today, forensic paleontology uses articulation analysis, species identification, and taphonomy to prevent such mistakes. Yet, the exact number of bones from the original cave assemblage, and whether all fragments match the final mount, remains partially unresolved in surviving records. The Magdeburg Unicorn story shows that science advances not by avoiding mistakes, but by documenting them and learning from them. Modern methodology was built on these very errors, making each misstep a step toward the truth.